Hi, Lonnie Mackley here. I just want to talk to you about the 12 steps. You probably know them as, the AA 12 steps or Alcoholics Anonymous, but they're used pretty much for a lot of recovery groups, no matter what the addiction is, because the principles themselves work for a lot of people. I believe that the 12 steps were given to us by God, and if we allow God to help us to work those steps, we can overcome pretty much any addiction by using them. But it's not by using the steps that we overcome the addiction. It's because we allow God to work us through them using the steps. You see the difference? They used to make me go to 3 AA meetings a day, 3 12-step meetings a day when I had a really bad addiction. It was mandated, and so I got through a lot of meetings because I had to do this, and I learned a lot. I read through the big book, the 12 traditions, those kinds of things. And so I just want to talk a little bit about the steps, about my history with addiction, and just to help you. These are Spirit-led steps. They're the same steps, but the steps, how the Holy Spirit led me through them, rather than just a program or an organization. So let's just start off with step one. Step one, we admitted we were powerless over the effects of our separation from God, that our lives had become unmanageable. And step one is really about recognizing your brokenness or your helplessness. And when I first started off, I knew that there had been some alcoholism. I'll just use alcohol as an example, but you can use these for any kind of addiction. The main point of me talking about these is to show you how the Holy Spirit worked me through them rather than me just following a program. And if just following a program works for you, that's great. But for me, that wasn't enough. I needed the Holy Spirit to work me through these steps for them to be effective in my life. So step one is basically just realizing how helpless that you really are and how powerless that you are. And this may seem like a small thing, but because most people think that there's still hope to control their addiction, they continue on with it, and they keep falling, they keep getting up, they keep falling, and it's not until you really hit your bottom, so to speak, and realize that you honestly can't beat it, that we'll surrender our will enough to allow God to help us. And that's what it had to come to for me. And my father was an alcoholic. He died at an early age because of damage that had been done to him because of alcoholism. My mother was a heavy drinker. She used to party every night. She was killed one night when I was 10 years old by a drunk driver. It was going the wrong way down Interstate 5 freeway at 2 o'clock in the morning, and she just died, instantly. And I have many other relatives. My own brother is also a recovering alcoholic. God has blessed him. So this has really touched my family, and it's kind of like certain types of addictions act like curses that go down our family line, and without God's help we can't beat it. And when it hit my life, there was a lot going on. I'd gone through a divorce. It was a very hard time in my life, and I was in the Air Force, and it just got very bad, and I went through 2 treatment centers and 11 detoxes in 1 year period. I had gotten demoted several times in the Air Force. It was just really a nightmare, and something that I couldn't get out of. Even the detoxes, I would go in with blood alcohol levels of 0.3 to 0.48, and that's a lot. That means like you're basically half your blood is alcohol. So it was a very, very severe problem for me. It was something that I could not beat. One of the treatment centers I had gone through was for the Air Force, and finally I was released with an honorable discharge, but I was released because I couldn't stop drinking. So for me it was a very, very severe problem. Like I said, they made me go to 3 AA meetings a day. They had me on a double dose of what's called Antabuse, and so it was just a nightmare for me, and I couldn't beat it. And so after a while I started realizing I honestly could not beat it. And when you find bottles all over your house every day, you start realizing you're not winning this war. And so that's what brought me to my place of finally surrendering. Step 2 came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And step 2 is about getting faith. It's about finally realizing that maybe you can't beat it and maybe God can. And that's a revelation too, just like it's a revelation or a revelation, however you want to put it, about that you can't stop yourself. It's a revelation that God can help you to stop. And it's not something that you can mentally ascend to or just say, yes, oh, well, yeah, I believe. It's got to be a real, honest-to-goodness, living being that is helping you. It can't just be a philosophy. It can't just be an idea. It just can't be something that you mentally try to ascend to. You need a real God with real power and ability to interact in your life to help you to overcome that. And once you start realizing, once you start seeing God's hand in your recovery, then you start having faith. And that's what happened for me. Is I started seeing God leading me in different avenues to start getting help. And I started realizing that I didn't have to die that way. I actually wanted to die sometimes. My life was just such a nightmare. It was a horrible nightmare. I was AWOL a number of times because I was too drunk to go to work. And I thought it was just all over. But God began to break into my life. He began to lead me. He began to help me. And it meant the whole world to me to have that help, because my life was pretty much over. And that's what it is when you really start hitting your bottom, you start looking for a way out of here. And that's what I was doing. And I was a Christian at the time. But nevertheless, this addiction was just, really winning. And I just didn't know what else to do. And God began to work in my life, and it meant everything. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. And step 3 really just involves a decision to let God be in charge, to keep Him in charge. And it's not really about just letting Him be in charge a little while. You got to let Him be in charge for good. And so I had some sobriety for a few years. It worked out well. And then somebody said to me, well, maybe you've been healed. And I started letting that idea stick in my head. It was my fault. But I relapsed. And I realized the problem was just as bad as ever. Worst decision I could have made. And then I completely just thought, well, I need more than this. I've got to have more to be able to recover, because nothing was really working. Like I needed, it wasn't just a matter of not drinking or not using an addiction. It was a matter of letting God really, really come in and help me and change me from the inside out rather than from the outside in. Because from the outside in, I was still just as much hooked, just as much living in fear as I ever was on the beginning. And I was a relapse waiting to happen. Is what took place. And all it takes is having some bad days, or playing with it in your head enough, and you will relapse. And so I needed something to happen from the inside out, from a real God. And that's when the Holy Spirit began to speak to me. He began to tell me that He could change me from the inside out if I allowed Him to. That He could go inside and heal the trauma, heal the roots that had been fueling my alcohol addiction and my other addictions. And so that's what happened. Is I began to surrender to the Holy Spirit's leadership over my recovery, rather than a program or rather than a person. And He began to come in and show me how the 12 steps could really be powerful and effective in my life. And I didn't even have to work the steps. I'd been pushed through working the steps a number of times. It really didn't work. But He began to lead me through the steps. And that's what really began to work for me. And I was the worst of the worst. And God gave me the best of His best. And I had no other hope. And I needed a real God. I didn't just need a program. And I just want to tell you that Jesus Christ is the real God. The God that created this whole earth in the Bible is the real God. And He'll prove it to you if you ask Him to. So there's no, God as you understand Him. God is God. And understand that, and just cry out to Him and He'll help you. So we'll continue this on part 2 of this series, Spirit-Led Recovery from Addiction. Okay? Bye-bye.